The air in the antechamber was a blade against his skin, chilled to a precise 17 degrees Celsius, a temperature calibrated to keep alpha minds sharp and focused. Kyle adjusted the cuffs of his slate-gray tunic, the fabric a smooth, synthetic weave that promised no wrinkles, no tells, no humanity. He ran a hand over his hair, cropped short and severe, another layer of the armor he wore every day. His reflection stared back from the polished obsidian wall. A man assembled from discipline and denial, his jaw tight, his eyes the color of a winter sky just before the snow. There was nothing soft in the image, nothing to betray the secret coiled in his blood. A serpent sleeping under the ice of chemical suppression. The daily dose was a ritual, a sacrament. The auto-injector, cool and metallic against the inside of his wrist, delivered the cocktail of neural dampeners and pheromone blockers that kept him safe, that kept him beta. It made him functional. It made him invisible in a world that prized alphas and pitied omegas. He was not an asset. He was not a vulnerability. He was Kale, senior analyst, designation 7B, and his mind was his only worth. Today, that worth was on trial. He was presenting the quarterly risk assessment for the Helios Initiative to Elias Vance and his inner circle, the Pack. It was not their official title, but it was what the Whispers called them in the data streams and the hushed server rooms. Elias Vance, the architect of this corporate empire, a prime alpha whose control was so absolute it felt like a law of physics. His presence reshaped the very air in a room. Kyle had spent 3 months on this projection, his algorithms weaving through terabytes of market data, political instability metrics, and climate shift probabilities. The conclusion was elegant in its brutal simplicity. Helios was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. To say so in that room to that man was akin to walking into a lion's den and pointing out a flaw in the alpha's hunting strategy. A flicker of warmth bloomed low in his belly, a ghost of a sensation he had not felt in a decade. He dismissed it. Nerves. The system monitors embedded in his wrist cuff showed his biometrics were stable. Heart rate at a calm 62 beats per minute. Core temperature a steady 37 degrees. The suppressants were holding. They always held. He pressed his palm against the cold obsidian, grounding himself in the sensation. The stone was unyielding, silent. Like him. The heavy door to the boardroom hissed open, a seamless panel of smoked glass retracting into the wall. The air that washed over him from within was different, thicker, charged with an ozone-like energy that was the signature of concentrated alpha presence. It was the scent of power, of dominance, of absolute, unshakable certainty. He stepped inside. The room was a circle, a conscious design choice to eliminate the hierarchy of a traditional rectangular table, an irony so profound it was almost humorous. At the center was a holographic display, a slowly rotating wireframe of the Solar Collection satellite at the heart of the Helios Initiative. Around it, seated in ergonomic chairs that looked more like thrones, were the 5 members of Vance's pack, and at the far side, silhouetted against the panoramic window that displayed the sprawling, rain-slicked city below, was Elias Vance. He did not turn. He did not need to. His presence was a gravitational force, pulling all focus toward him. Kale walked to his designated position opposite Vance, the soft soles of his shoes making no sound on the micro-absorbent flooring. He placed his datapad on the cool surface of the non-existent table, its light a small, contained blue glow. The other alphas watched him, their gazes ranging from dismissive to predatory. Marcus, Vance's head of security, had his arms crossed, his muscular frame straining the seams of his tailored jacket. His eyes, small and dark, were fixed on Kyle, with undisguised suspicion. "Analyst," Vance's voice was low, a resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the bones. It was not loud, but it commanded the silence. He turned, and the city light caught the silver at his temples, a striking contrast to his dark hair. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, intelligent and utterly devoid of warmth. "You may begin." Kyle inclined his head, a gesture of pure, practiced deference. He activated the datapad, and the satellite hologram was replaced by cascading streams of data, charts, and probability curves. "Mr. Vance, members of the Council, the following is my third quarter projection for the Helios Initiative, focusing on systemic vulnerabilities and potential points of failure." His voice was steady, a monotone he had cultivated for years. It was the voice of the data, impersonal and irrefutable. He was merely its vessel. He moved through the first part of the presentation with fluid precision, his words clean and sharp. He outlined the material stress fractures in the satellite's containment shielding, the unexpected solar flare cycles, the geopolitical instability of the ground-based energy distribution network. He was in control. He was a machine processing information, but the warmth in his gut was still there, a tiny ember refusing to be extinguished. It pulsed, a faint, rhythmic beat that was beginning to sync with his own heartbeat. He ignored it. He pushed it down. It was phantom pain, a ghost in the machine. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, and he resisted the urge to wipe it away. A sign of weakness. A tell. His cuff monitor blinked, a tiny amber warning light he was sure only he could see. Core temperature, 37.4. Still within acceptable parameters, but rising. The scent of the room was becoming overwhelming. The clean, sterile air was now thick with the scent of powerful alphas, cedarwood from Vance, scorched iron from Marcus, something like cold stone and pine from the others. It was an assault on senses he had long kept dormant, and his body, the traitorous flesh he had tried so hard to discipline, was beginning to react. A faint, almost imperceptible sweetness, like rain on dry earth, began to tinge the air around him. His own scent. It was impossible. The blockers were fail-safe. He faltered for a fraction of a second, his perfectly modulated voice catching on a single syllable. No one seemed to notice. Except Vance. His gaze sharpened, his head tilting just a degree, like a predator detecting a change in the wind. Cale's heart hammered against his ribs. The cuff monitor blinked again. 37.8. The serpent was waking up, and he was trapped in a cage with the very creatures it was designed to call. He forced himself to continue, his words becoming faster, more clipped, the rhythm of his speech a desperate attempt to outrun the rising tide within him. He was not an Omega. He was not prey. He was Analyst 7B, and he would finish his report. The data streams flowed around him, a river of logic and numbers that had always been his sanctuary. But now the river felt like it was pulling him under. The warmth in his abdomen was no longer a gentle pulse. It was a liquid fire, spreading through his veins, making his skin feel too tight, too sensitive. The fabric of his tunic, once a comfort, was now an abrasive cage against his overheating flesh. Every breath was a struggle, dragging the thick, alpha-heavy air into lungs that felt like they were shrinking. The scent of ozone and cedar that was Elias Vance was no longer just a background note. It was an invasive presence, coiling around him, probing the cracks that were rapidly forming in his chemical armor. He could feel his own scent, a scent he had not consciously registered in a decade, beginning to bleed into the sterile atmosphere of the boardroom. It was faint, a ghost of petrichor and something wilder, something green and alive, a desperate bloom in a concrete wasteland, a scent of coming rain after a long drought. It was the smell of need, of submission, of heat. His mind screamed in silent, primal terror. Not here. Not now. He forced his eyes to remain on the holographic display, on the clean, predictable lines of a graph showing the exponential risk curve. "As you can see from the projection," he said, his voice straining to maintain its monotone, "the probability of a containment breach reaches 97% within the next 18 months. He heard a low growl from Marcus, a sound of pure, instinctual dismissal. "The analyst's models are flawed, overly cautious." "The data is not cautious, sir," Kyle replied, his gaze flicking to Marcus for a bare second before returning to Vance. "It is conclusive." It was Vance's reaction that terrified him. The Prime Alpha had gone utterly still, his storm-grey eyes fixed on Kale with an unnerving intensity. He wasn't looking at the data. He was looking at him. He was watching the fine tremor in Kale's hands, the sheen of sweat on his brow, the subtle flare of his nostrils as he fought for breath. He knew, or he was beginning to. The knowledge was a physical blow, and Kyle's composure fractured. The numbers on the display blurred. The room seemed to tilt, the faces of the other alphas swimming in his vision. The monitor on his wrist was flashing amber insistently now. Core temperature, 38.5. Pheromone output, trace levels detected, trace. It was a clinical, insufficient word for the catastrophe unfolding in his bloodstream. The blockers were failing, not slowly, not gracefully, but a catastrophic, cascading system failure. The serpent was not just awake, it was uncoiling, its venom a sweet, intoxicating poison flooding his system. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He gripped the edge of the non-existent table, his fingers pressing into the cool, hard light of the console, the only solid thing in his collapsing world. He had to get out. He had to escape before the scent became a siren's call, before the last of his control shattered. "That concludes my presentation," he managed to say, the words thick in his throat. "If there are no further questions—" "I have a question, analyst." Vance's voice cut through the haze in Kyle's mind, sharp and precise. He had not moved, but his presence seemed to fill the room, pressing down on Kyle, suffocating him. "Your data suggest a fundamental design flaw in the Helios matrix, a flaw my own engineering teams have repeatedly assured me does not exist. You are claiming they are all wrong." "The data is not a claim. It is a mathematical certainty," Kale whispered, the effort to speak costing him more than he had to give. The scent was stronger now, a clear, sweet signal of distress, of burgeoning heat, cutting through the heavy musk of the alphas. He could smell their response, confusion, aggression, arousal. It was a suffocating cocktail of raw instinct that his own biology was screaming to answer. Marcus was on his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "What is that smell? It's cloying." Another alpha, a man with a pale, hawkish face, sniffed the air, a predatory curiosity in his eyes. "It's sweet, almost like—" He trailed off, his eyes widening as he looked at Kyle. The realization dawned on their faces, one by one. Contempt, disgust, hunger. They were looking at him not as an analyst, but as a thing, an omega in distress, an Omega going into an unscheduled, unsuppressed heat in a room full of prime alphas. It was a death sentence. Kyle's legs gave out. He stumbled back, his hand flying to his wrist, fumbling with the cuff, trying to trigger the emergency override, a purge dose that would flood his system and knock him unconscious. But his fingers were numb, clumsy. He was too late. Vance finally moved. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, the motion economical and utterly commanding. The other alphas fell silent, their aggression instantly checked by his authority. He was the only one who seemed unaffected by the scent, his expression a mask of cold, unreadable calm. Only the slight flare of his nostrils betrayed the fact that he was breathing it in, analyzing it, cataloguing it. "Analyst," he said again, his voice dangerously soft. "Stay calm." It was the most absurd command Kyle had ever heard. Calm was a distant country he had been exiled from. All that was left was a blinding, white-hot panic. His vision tunneled, the edges darkening. The last thing he saw was Elias Vance's storm-grey eyes, watching him as he fell into the abyss that had opened up inside him. The sweet, cloying scent of his own ruin filled the air, a final, silent scream of surrender. The world swam back into focus, not with a jolt, but as a slow, creeping dawn of sensation. The first thing he registered was the silence. Not the oppressive, charged silence of the boardroom, but a deep, insulated quiet that felt heavy and absolute. The second was the texture beneath him, sheets of an impossibly high thread, count, cool and smooth against his feverish skin. He was lying on his side, curled into a defensive ball, his body aching with a profound cellular exhaustion. The air was different here. It was clean, filtered, but it held a ghost of a scent that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. Cedarwood and cold mountain air. Vance. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the fog in his mind. He forced his eyes open. He was in a bedroom, a space of minimalist luxury that was both vast and claustrophobic. The walls were a soft, matte grey, the floor a dark, polished wood. One entire wall was a sheet of floor-to-ceiling glass, revealing a breathtaking, vertiginous view of the city's glittering spires, piercing a starless, ink-black sky. He was high up, very high up, in Vance Tower. He pushed himself into a sitting position, the sheet pooling around his waist. He was wearing a simple, long-sleeved shirt of soft, grey cotton and matching trousers. Not his uniform. His own clothes were gone. His datapad, his cuff monitor, his auto-injector. All gone. He was stripped bare, not just of his clothes, but of his identity, his armor. The heat was still there, a low, simmering fire in his blood. The suppressants had failed completely, washed away by the biological tide. He could feel his body in a way he hadn't in years. The sensitivity of his skin, the dull ache in his lower back, the slick of moisture between his thighs, and the scent. His scent. It filled the room, a heady, complex aroma of rain-soaked earth and blooming nightshade, embarrassingly potent, undeniably Omega. He was exposed, a raw nerve. A door hissed open, and he flinched, scrambling back against the headboard, pulling the sheet up to his chin like a shield. Elias Vance stood in the doorway. He was dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers, his posture relaxed, but radiating an aura of absolute control. Held a small tray with a glass of water and 2 white pills. He walked into the room, his steps silent on the wooden floor, and placed the tray on a bedside table that seemed to materialize from the wall. He did not look at Kyle with lust or contempt. His expression was one of clinical assessment, the way a scientist might observe a volatile, unpredictable chemical reaction. "Your core temperature has stabilized," Vance said, his voice a calm, level baritone that did nothing to soothe the frantic hammering of Kyle's heart. "The initial fever has broken. These are nutrient supplements and a mild sedative. They will help with the cramping." Kyle stared at him, his throat too dry to speak. The sedative was a lie. It was a neutralizer, a way to keep him docile, manageable. "Where am I?" Kyle finally managed, his voice a raw rasp. "My private penthouse, the top 3 floors of this building," Vance replied, his gaze sweeping the room as if to confirm his own statement. "You are secure here." "Secure?" The word was a bitter mockery. "I'm your prisoner." Vance's lips thinned into a line that was not quite a smile. It was something colder. "You are a security risk, analyst. Your condition compromised a classified executive meeting. It exposed a weakness not only in yourself, but in my senior staff. Their reaction was suboptimal." He looked back at Kyle, his grey eyes pinning him to the bed. "You are also an unforeseen asset, an omega of your intelligence, one who could function at your level for so long while suppressed, is a biological anomaly, a very valuable one." He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. Kyle's hands clenched into fists in the soft sheets. "I want to leave." "That is not an option," Vance stated, the words simple, final, unarguable. "Your pheromonal signature is now logged in every atmospheric sensor in this city. Your identity as Beta Analyst 7B has been compromised. To the world, you are now a security threat being contained. To me, you are a problem that requires a solution." He gestured to the tray. "The sedative is for your own comfort. The heat will intensify over the next 48 hours. It will be unpleasant." Unpleasant. The clinical, detached word was an insult to the biological torment that was coming for him. The complete surrender of mind to body, the all-consuming need that would strip away every last vestige of his carefully constructed self. And he was to endure it here, in this cage, under the watchful eye of the Alpha, who was both his captor and the focus of his body's traitorous instincts. The scent of cedarwood was a hook in his senses, pulling at him, a deep, primal part of him wanting to lean into it, to seek comfort in the very source of his domination. He hated it. He hated his own body for its weakness. "I won't be your pet," Kale spat, the words laced with a venom born of pure desperation. For the first time, a wabetai flicker of something unreadable crossed Vance's face. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. "I have no interest in pets, analyst," he said softly. "I have an interest in elegant systems. You have disrupted mine. Now, I must find a way to integrate you into it." He turned and walked to the door. "Rest. We will speak again when you are more lucid." The door hissed shut behind him, the lock engaging with a soft, definitive click. Kale was alone again in the silent, luxurious cage. He looked at the pills on the tray, then at his own trembling hands. He was trapped. The system he had tried so hard to master had finally claimed him, and the man who ran that system now held his life, his body, and his future in his calm, calculating hands. He curled back into a ball, a wave of helpless despair washing over him, and for the first time in 10 years, he wept. The hours bled into one another, a seamless, disorienting flow of time marked only by the shifting light against the panoramic window and the escalating war within his own body. The city outside was a silent, glittering spectacle, a universe away from the claustrophobic reality of his prison. He did not take the pills. They remained on the tray, two small white monoliths of surrender, a testament to his last, futile act of defiance. He would face this storm on his own terms, even if it broke him. The heat was a rising fever, a slow, meticulous invasion. It began as a deep, radiating warmth in his core, but it soon consumed him entirely. His skin became exquisitely sensitive. The soft cotton of the shirt felt like sandpaper. The cool air from the climate control, a physical blow. A constant, low-grade ache settled in his bones, a prelude to the more violent cramps he knew were coming. His thoughts grew sluggish, syrupy. The sharp, analytical mind he had so carefully honed dissolving into a fog of instinct and sensation. Logic became a foreign language. All that mattered was the primal, biological imperative that was screaming through his veins. He needed. The word was a brand on his soul. He needed a nest. He needed comfort. He needed an alpha. He fought it. He paced the length of the vast room, his bare feet silent on the polished floor, the motion a desperate attempt to outrun the demands of his body. He catalogued every item in the room, the bed with its grey sheets, the integrated terminal in the wall that remained stubbornly offline, the small Spartan bathroom with its frosted glass walls and chrome fixtures. He counted the lights in the ceiling. He traced the lines of the wood grain on the floor. He tried to ground himself in facts, in observations, in anything other than the humiliating, overwhelming reality of his own flesh. But his body was a traitor. His hands, acting on an impulse he couldn't control, began to gather the soft furnishings of the room. The pillows from the bed, the thick, heavy blanket folded at its foot, the plush robe hanging in the open-fronted closet. Dragged them to the furthest corner of the room, the one most shrouded in shadow, away from the accusing light of the window. He arranged them, burrowing into the center, creating a makeshift nest. The moment he settled into it, a wave of profound, shameful relief washed over him. The scent of his own distress, of his need, was concentrated here, a cocoon of pheromones that offered a sliver of comfort in his isolation. He buried his face in a pillow, inhaling his own scent, a lonely echo in the vast emptiness of the room. And through it all, he felt watched. There were no visible cameras, no obvious sensors, but the feeling was unshakable. Elias Vance was observing him. He was a specimen in a sterile enclosure, his every pained whimper, his every instinctual movement, being recorded, analyzed, logged. The thought was a violation that ran deeper than any physical touch. He was a data point in Vance's elegant system. He drifted in and out of a feverish, restless sleep, his dreams a chaotic collage of fragmented memories. He was a boy again, small and terrified, hiding in a closet as his parents' frantic shouts echoed through the house. The scent of his first heat had been a catastrophe, a beacon that had drawn unwanted attention, that had shattered their quiet, carefully managed lives. He remembered the shame in his father's eyes, the fear in his mother's. They had sent him away to a facility, a place that promised to manage his condition. It was a cold, clinical place where omegas were treated like malfunctioning pieces of hardware. They taught him control through pain and humiliation. They gave him the suppressants, the blessed, poisonous chemicals that had allowed him to build a new life, a new identity, on the ashes of the old one. He was not an Omega. He was a survivor. He woke with a gasp, his body slick with sweat. A cramp, sharp and vicious, seized his abdomen, and he cried out, curling in on himself, his knuckles white as he gripped a pillow. The pain was a physical manifestation of his own self-loathing, a punishment for the body he could not escape. The door to the room hissed open. Kale tensed, his head snapping up, a wounded animal's growl rumbling in his chest. It was Vance. He stood in the doorway, holding not a tray, but a single leather-bound book. He took in the scene. Kale in his pathetic nest, his face flushed with fever, his eyes wild with pain and fear, and his expression remained unchanged, a mask of impenetrable calm. He walked slowly into the room and crouched down a careful distance from the nest. He did not try to enter Kale's space. He simply placed the book on the floor. "I thought you might appreciate a distraction," Vance said, his voice low and even. "It is a first edition, pre-digital. The tactile sensation of paper can be grounding." Kyle stared at the book. It was a collection of ancient poetry, its title embossed in faded gold leaf. It was an absurd gesture, a profoundly human one. It was a crack in the cold, clinical facade. "I don't want your distractions," Kyle rasped, his voice trembling. "I want to be left alone." "To be alone in your condition is dangerous," Vance stated simply. "Pheromonal feedback loops can cause psychological distress, seizures." He was framing his presence as a medical necessity, another form of control. "Your concern is touching," Kale sneered, the sound weak but defiant. Vance's grey eyes met his, and for a moment the clinical detachment wavered. Kyle saw a flicker of something else, not pity, something closer to recognition. "Your file said you excelled in classical literature at the academy," Vance continued, ignoring Kyle's sarcasm. "Before you switched your major to algorithmic analysis, an interesting transition, from the chaotic beauty of human expression to the clean certainty of numbers." He knew. Of course he knew. He had read every line of Kale's file. He had dissected his life, his choices, his fears. He was not just a captor, he was a scholar of his captive. The intimacy of it was suffocating. "I prefer certainty," Kale said, the words a lie even to his own ears. He had not chosen certainty. He had fled from chaos, from the messy, unpredictable, dangerous reality of his own nature. Vance nodded slowly. "And yet, here we are." He stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow over Kyle's nest. "The book is for you, if you choose to read it." He turned and left as silently as he had come, the door hissing shut, leaving Kyle alone once more with the scent of cedarwood, the silent accusation of the pills, and a book of poetry he was too proud to touch. He did not touch the book for a full-day cycle. It sat on the floor just beyond the perimeter of his nest, a silent challenge. He watched it as the cramps intensified, as the fever ebbed and flowed, as his mind became a battleground between lucid defiance and a thick pheromonal haze. The heat was a relentless siege, breaking down his defenses one by one. The need for an alpha became a physical ache, a hollow craving that logic could not erase. His body yearned for a grounding presence, for the scent of a dominant partner to soothe the violent storm in his blood. And the only alpha scent available was Vance's. It lingered in the filtered air, a ghost that tormented him, a constant reminder of his captivity and his body's betrayal. He hated it. He craved it. The contradiction was tearing him apart. Finally, in a moment of desperate, aching loneliness, when the silence of the room felt like a physical weight pressing down on him, he reached for the book. His hand trembled as he stretched out from the relative safety of his nest. The leather cover was cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. He drew it back into his nest, the object feeling foreign and substantial in his feverish grasp. He opened it. The pages were thick, creamy, and smelled faintly of dust and time. The text was printed in an elegant, archaic font. He read the first line of the first poem, his eyes struggling to focus on the words. My soul is a dark forest, and in it a single, frightened bird. The line struck him with the force of a physical blow. He read it again, and again. The words were a mirror, reflecting the caged, terrified thing fluttering in the depths of his own being. He began to read, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper in the silent room. He read of love and loss, of defiance and despair, of the brutal, beautiful chaos of a life lived without armor. The poems were a lifeline, a connection to a world beyond the sterile grey walls of his prison, beyond the humiliating demands of his own biology. They were a reminder that others had felt this way, had been broken and lost, and had found a way to put words to their pain. For a few precious hours, he was not a specimen. He was not an omega in heat. He was a man reading a book. The door hissed open again. He didn't startle this time. He had been half expecting it. Vance entered, carrying another tray. This one held a bowl of steaming broth and a piece of bread. He placed it on the floor in the same spot where the book had been. He saw Kale holding the book, his finger tracing a line of text, and a flicker of something. Satisfaction, intrigue, crossed his features before being suppressed. You need to eat, Vance said. His voice was still calm, still measured, but there was a new quality to it, a subtle softening of its clinical edge. Kale looked from the book to Vance's face. The alpha's features were sharp, aristocratic, a face carved from stone and ambition. But his eyes, those storm-grey eyes, held a depth that Kyle was only just beginning to perceive. They were not just the eyes of a predator, they were the eyes of an observer, a lonely sentinel watching the world from his impossibly high tower. Why are you doing this? Kyle asked, his voice raw. The book, the food, this gentle jailer routine. What is your objective? Vance considered the question for a long moment. He did not give a simple, dismissive answer. He seemed to be weighing his words with the same precision Kyle used for his data analysis. My objective is to understand a variable I did not anticipate, he said finally. You are an anomaly analyst. You defy classification. My system is built on predictability, on control. You are neither predictable nor at this moment controllable. So I'm a puzzle for you to solve, Cal said, the bitterness sharp on his tongue. Once you have your answer, what then? Do you discard me? Integrate me? Every variable must be accounted for, Vance said, the answer both illuminating and infuriatingly vague. He gestured to the broth. Your body is consuming its own resources. If you refuse to eat, I will have you sedated and fed intravenously. The outcome will be the same, but the process will be less dignified. The choice is yours. The illusion of choice again. Control, wrapped in the language of reason. Kyle stared at him, a silent battle of wills passing between them. The scent in the room was a thick, complex tapestry now. Kyle's sweet, desperate distress call, and Vance's calm, dominant cedarwood. They were a volatile combination, a spark and a powder keg. But there was something else weaving between them now, a fragile thread of connection forged by a book of old poems and a bowl of soup. It was terrifying. It was dangerous. And in the depths of his loneliness and pain, it was the only thing he had. Slowly, deliberately, Kyle closed the book, setting it carefully beside him in the nest. He reached out and drew the tray toward him. He picked up the spoon, his hand shaking, and brought the warm, savory broth to his lips. He ate under the watchful gaze of his captor, each spoonful a concession, an admission of his own weakness, his own humanity. And as he ate, he felt Vance's presence not as a threat, but as a steady, grounding weight in the turbulent storm of his heat. It was the most dangerous feeling of all. The narrative focus shifted, pulling away from the insulated, fever dream reality of the penthouse and into the cold, humming heart of the Vance Corporation. Here, in an office that mirrored the minimalist aesthetic of Cale's prison but was larger, colder, and dominated by a desk of black volcanic glass, Elias Vance sat alone. The city sprawled beneath him, a circuit board of light and motion, a system of his own design, and for the first time in years, a component was malfunctioning. On a series of holographic screens that floated in the air before him, data streams scrolled past. One screen showed Kyle's biometrics relayed from the discrete sensors in the penthouse: heart rate, core temperature, pheromone output. The numbers were alarming, a testament to the violence of an unsuppressed heat in a body long denied its nature. Another screen showed Cale himself, a live feed from a high-resolution, near-invisible lens. He was curled in his nest to sleep, the book of poetry clutched to his chest like a talisman. His face, even in the restless grip of a fevered dream, had lost the sharp, severe mask of Analyst 7B. It was younger, softer, profoundly vulnerable. Elias watched the image, his face a study in neutrality. He was processing, analyzing. The situation was a tactical and strategic nightmare. The other members of his pack, particularly Marcus, were becoming restless. Marcus saw Cale as a weapon that had misfired in their own citadel. His recommendation, delivered with brutal simplicity, was to have the Omega sedated, his memory wiped, and sent to a corporate reconditioning facility. He would be a docile, valuable asset, his brilliant mind repurposed for less sensitive work, his biology managed and controlled. It was the logical, efficient solution. It was the solution Elias himself would have proposed a week ago, but he had not given the order. He found himself hesitant. He minimized the live feed and brought up Kyle's complete personnel file, not the sanitized version he had seen before, but the deep-level archive accessible only to him. He scrolled past the commendations, the stellar performance reviews, the flawless work record. He went deeper to the academy records, the medical history, the sealed juvenile file. He saw the transition, the brilliant, passionate literature student whose essays on pre-digital poetry were still used as teaching examples, vanishing, replaced by the cold, detached data analyst. He saw the first prescription for military-grade suppressants, filed just after a family incident that had been officially redacted. He saw the brutal, systematic erasure of a person, the construction of a shell. He was not just an anomaly. He was a creation, forged in trauma and fear. Elias looked at the live feed again. He saw the man in the nest, not as a security risk, not as an asset, but as the ghost of the boy who had once loved poetry. The scent, the memory of the scent that had flooded the boardroom, was seared into his mind. It was not just the cloying, simple scent of a typical Omega in heat. It had been complex, layered. Petrichor, yes, the scent of rain on dry earth, but underneath, something sharper. Ozone, the smell of a coming storm, of electricity, of a power that had been contained for too long. It had bypassed the logical, controlled part of his alpha brain and struck something deeper, something older, a resonance. It was an inefficient, illogical feeling. It was a vulnerability, and Elias Vance did not tolerate vulnerabilities, especially in himself. His private comm line chimed, a soft, unobtrusive sound. He glanced at the caller ID, Marcus. He let it chime twice more before accepting the call. Marcus's face appeared on one of the screens, his expression grim, his jaw tight with impatience. Elias, we need to resolve the Omega situation. The board is getting nervous. Rumors are spreading. The situation is contained, Elias replied, his voice level, betraying nothing of his internal conflict. He is under observation. Observation? Marcus scoffed, a rare display of insubordination. He's a biological time bomb. He nearly tore the pack apart with a single cent. What are you waiting for? He needs to be neutralized. The word hung in the air between them. Neutralized. A clean, corporate euphemism for breaking a person. The analyst possesses a unique skill set, Elias said, his eyes still on the sleeping form of Kyle. His predictive models are more accurate than any we have developed. To neutralize him would be a waste of a significant asset. He's an Omega, Elias. Marcus's voice rose, laced with frustration. His skill set is irrelevant now. His biology makes him unstable, a risk, unless you intend to claim him, to use him to solidify your own position. A mated prime Omega is a powerful symbol. Elias's gaze went cold. The air in his office seemed to drop several degrees. Your speculation is bordering on insubordination, Marcus. My reasons are my own. The analyst remains under my personal jurisdiction. You will consider the matter closed until I inform you otherwise. He did not wait for a reply. He cut the connection, leaving Marcus's angry, frustrated face to dissolve into nothingness. He was alone again, with the silence and the data streams. Marcus was right, of course. From a purely tactical standpoint, Kale was a liability. But he was also interesting. He was a system that had been forced into an unnatural state of equilibrium for a decade. Now, that system had crashed, and in the wreckage, something new and unpredictable was emerging. Elias Vance did not believe in fate. He believed in variables, probabilities, and control. But as he watched the sleeping Omega, a man who had tried to build a fortress of numbers to protect a poet's soul, he was forced to acknowledge a new variable in his meticulous calculations, a variable that smelled like an oncoming storm, a variable he was not yet willing to discard. He closed the files, blanked the screens, and for a long time simply watched, an architect observing the one beautiful, unpredictable flaw in his perfect design. The peak of the heat was a maelstrom. It was a dissolution of self, a complete surrender to the primal, agonizing demands of the body. Kale lost all track of time, all sense of where his own skin ended and the feverish air began. He was adrift in a sea of sensation, his thoughts reduced to a single, repeating mantra of need, need, need. The cramps were relentless, white-hot claws of pain that tore through him, leaving him gasping and trembling in their wake. His nest was a wreck, the pillows and blankets twisted and damp with sweat. He was burning from the inside out. Through the haze of pain, he was vaguely aware of Vance's continued presence. He never stayed long. He would appear with water, with broth, with cool cloths that he would place on Kyle's forehead. His touch was always brief, impersonal, clinical, but it was a touch nonetheless, a point of anchor in the raging storm, Kale's body, the ultimate traitor, arched toward that touch, craving it, even as his fractured mind screamed in protest. The scent of cedarwood was no longer a torment. It was a promise of relief, a grounding force against the chaos. In a moment of fleeting lucidity, he saw Vance standing by the window, looking out at the city, his back to him. The rigid, controlled set of his shoulders, the stillness of his posture. It was the image of a man holding himself in check against a powerful force. Kale realized, with a jolt of terrifying clarity, that this was not easy for Vance either. The Alpha was being bombarded by the full, unfiltered force of an Omega's heat, a scent designed by nature to bypass reason and command a response. And he was resisting it, for Kyle, or for his own inscrutable reasons. The knowledge shifted something inside Kyle. It cracked the narrative of the cold, calculating captor. It introduced a new, more complex variable. The pain crested, a wave so immense it stole his breath and threatened to drag him under into unconsciousness. A raw, wounded cry was torn from his throat, a sound of pure, animal agony. He didn't hear the door this time, didn't register Vance's approach. He only knew that suddenly a hand was on his brow, cool and steady. Another hand rested on his shoulder, a firm, grounding pressure. "Breathe, Kale." Vance's voice was low, pitched to cut through the pain, a quiet command in the heart of the storm. It was the first time he had used his name. Not analyst, not 7B, Kale. The sound of it, spoken in that low baritone, was a shock to his system. He forced his lungs to obey, dragging in a ragged, shuddering breath. He opened his eyes. Vance was kneeling beside the nest, his face close, his storm-grey eyes stripped of their usual detachment. In their depths, Kale saw not clinical curiosity, but a reflection of his own pain. He saw empathy, and he saw the strain of control. The muscles in Vance's jaw were corded tight, a fine tremor in the hand on his shoulder. His scent, the cool cedar wood, was thicker now, laced with something sharper, muskier. A response. He was fighting his own instincts to maintain this fragile peace. "It's too much," Kale whispered, the words fractured, broken. Tears streamed from his eyes, not of sorrow, but of sheer, overwhelming physical and emotional overload. "I know," Vance said, his voice softer than Kyle had ever heard it. "I know." He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not promise it would end soon. He simply acknowledged the reality of Kyle's suffering. He stayed there, kneeling beside him, his hands a steady, comforting weight, a silent sentinel sharing the vigil. He did not try to soothe him with alpha pheromones, did not try to dominate the heat into submission. He just was. A presence. He rode out the worst of the wave with him, his stillness a rock for Kale to cling to. As the intense, sharp peak of the cramp began to recede, leaving behind a field of aching, trembling exhaustion, Kale's head fell back against a pillow. His gaze met Vance's. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, with the raw, stripped-bare intimacy of shared vulnerability. In that moment, they were not captor and captive, not Alpha and Omega. They were two people, trapped in a room by a biological imperative that threatened to consume them both. Vance's control was a shield for them both. It was a form of protection Kyle had never known, the protection he had sought in his suppressants, in his numbers, in his denial, was a pale imitation of the strength he saw in this man, who held his own primal nature on a leash of pure, indomitable will. A strange, unwanted feeling bloomed in Kale's chest, somewhere beneath the pain and the fear. It was a fragile, terrifying thing. Gratitude. He saw the cost of Vance's control in the faint sheen of sweat on his temples, in the rigid line of his shoulders. He was paying a price to offer this small, profound comfort. The moment stretched, suspended, in the silent, feverish room. Then, as if realizing he had revealed too much, Vance slowly withdrew his hands. The loss of contact was a physical ache. He stood, his mask of cool composure sliding back into place, though the cracks were still visible around the edges. "The worst is over," he said, his voice once again clipped and professional. "Your hormone levels are beginning to decline. You should sleep now. A true sleep." He turned to leave. "Wait." Kyle's voice was barely a whisper. Vance stopped, his back still to him. "Thank you," Kyle said, the words costing him a universe of pride. Vance was silent for a long moment. He did not turn around. "Rest, Kale," he said. And then he was gone, the door hissing shut, leaving Kyle alone in the aftermath of the storm, the ghost of a gentle touch lingering on his skin. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. He awoke to the sensation of clarity. The fever was gone. The cloying, desperate haze of the heat had lifted, leaving behind a clean, quiet stillness in its wake. His body was sore, exhausted, as if he had run a marathon, but it was his own again. The serpent was sleeping, sated and calm. He lay in the nest, the sheets cool against his skin, and watched the grey light of dawn creep into the room, slowly erasing the glittering lights of the city. He felt empty, scoured clean. He pushed himself up, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked on steady legs to the bathroom, the cool wood of the floor a welcome sensation. He looked at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. The face that stared back was a stranger's. The sharp angles of his face were softened by exhaustion. There were dark circles under his eyes, but the eyes themselves were clear, the color of a winter sky after the storm has passed. His scent was still there, a faint, lingering trace of petrichor and nightshade. But it was calm now, a quiet statement of fact rather than a desperate scream. It was the scent of an Omega. He placed his hands on the cool marble of the counter and took a deep breath. He was not Analyst 7B. He was not the boy who hid in closets. He was this person, in this room, with this body. The denial was over. The fight was over. All that was left was the truth. He showered, the hot water a blessed relief on his aching muscles. He dressed in a fresh set of the soft grey clothes that had been left for him. When he emerged, clean and clear-headed, Vance was there. He was sitting in a chair by the window that Kyle hadn't noticed before, a datapad resting in his lap. He was dressed in his usual immaculate dark tunic. He looked as if he had not slept at all. He looked up as Kyle entered, his grey eyes assessing, searching. "You are lucid," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes," Kyle said. His voice was steady. He felt no fear. The worst had happened, and he had survived. There was a strange, liberating power in that knowledge. "The biological event has concluded," Vance said, his tone returning to the formal, clinical register Kale was used to. He stood and walked to the center of the room. "We now need to discuss your future," he gestured, and a holographic display shimmered into existence between them. It showed two branching paths, two neat, clean options. It was a risk assessment matrix, Kyle's life reduced to a flowchart. "Option 1, Vance began, his voice devoid of emotion. You will be given a new identity, a clean slate. You will be relocated to an off-world colony, one of the agrarian settlements on Kepler 186f. You will be provided with a lifetime supply of suppressants, a new formulation that is guaranteed not to fail. You will be able to live out your life as a beta. Your previous identity and everything that has transpired here will be erased. You will be free, in a sense. Kale looked at the glowing diagram. Freedom. It was what he had always thought he wanted. The chance to be invisible, to be normal, to escape the prison of his biology. But the word tasted like ash in his mouth now. It was not freedom. It was exile. It was another, more permanent form of hiding. Option 2, Vance continued, and the second path on the flowchart lit up. You remain here. You will be officially integrated into my organization, into my pack. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. You will be recognized as an Omega. You will be afforded my personal protection. Your security and well-being will be guaranteed. In return, you will be mated. To me. Mated. The word was a punch to the gut. To be collared, claimed, his identity subsumed entirely into that of the Prime Alpha. He would be a symbol of Vance's power, a prized possession, his mind and body belonging to another. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Security. It was the other thing he had craved. The safety of a system, the protection of a powerful patron. But the price was his self. You present me with a choice between erasure and ownership, Kyle said, his voice quiet but firm. You call one freedom and the other security. I call them two different cages. Vance's expression did not change, but a flicker of something, respect, surprise, moved in his eyes. It is a pragmatic assessment of your situation, Kale. These are the logical, most efficient solutions to the problem you represent. I am not a problem to be solved, Kale said, taking a step closer. The lingering scent of Vance's cedarwood no longer felt like a threat. It felt familiar. I am not a variable to be integrated into your system. I am the man who found the flaw in your Helios initiative. I am the analyst who can see the cracks in your elegant systems, because I have lived my entire life in the cracks of this one. He gestured to the city beyond the window, to the world of alphas, betas, and omegas. You see the world from the top of this tower, Mr. Vance. You see the patterns, the data streams, the grand design. I see it from the ground up. I know how it feels to be a component that doesn't fit, a data point that gets rounded down and ignored. He looked Vance directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. Your two options are insufficient. I propose a third. Vance remained silent, his stillness an invitation to continue. He was listening, truly listening. I will work for you, Kale said. Not as a mated Omega, not as a protected pet, as a partner, an advisor. My insight, my perspective, is something you don't have in your boardroom full of alphas who all think the same way. I will be your asset, not because of my biology, but because of my mind. A mind that has been shaped by the very system you command. In return, you will give me not a cage, but a place at the table. You will give me autonomy. You will give me respect. It was an audacious, impossible demand. A gamble played with the only cards he had left, his own mind, his own worth. He stood before the most powerful man he had ever known, stripped of all his defenses, and offered not submission, not flight, but a negotiation between equals. He waited for the dismissal, the cold laugh, the clinical rejection. He held his breath, and waited for the final, elegant solution. Elias Vance did not laugh. He did not dismiss. He simply watched Kale, his grey eyes narrowed in intense, silent concentration. He was processing this new, unexpected variable. Kyle's proposal was not on the flowchart. It was a disruption to the binary choice he had so carefully constructed. It was illogical, unprecedented, and profoundly defiant. It was, Elias had to admit, brilliant. He had offered Kale a choice between two forms of control, one subtle and one overt, both designed to neutralize the threat he represented and integrate him back into a predictable system. He had expected fear, submission, or perhaps a desperate plea for the first option, the illusion of freedom. He had not expected this, a demand for partnership, a leveraging of his own unique value proposition, turning his greatest vulnerability, his status as an Omega who had lived a lie, into his greatest strength. Kyle was not just an analyst, he was a strategist. A partnership, Elias repeated, the words slow and deliberate, as if he were tasting them for the first time. You believe your perspective as an Omega grants you a unique analytical insight that my current team lacks. I don't believe it. I know it, Kale countered, his confidence growing. Your entire corporate structure is built on a hierarchy of dynamics you take for granted. You see strengths and weaknesses. I see the invisible pressures, the resentments, the hidden costs of that system. I see the flaws in the human components of your machine, because I have been one of the broken ones. Helios is failing not just because of material stress, but because your people are too afraid of you to bring you the truth. I was not. That is my value. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the weight of Kale's gamble. He had laid his cards on the table. He had nothing left to play. He had offered his mind, but to accept it, Vance would have to acknowledge the flaws in his own perfect system. He would have to make room for chaos, for an unpredictable variable at the very heart of his empire. Elias walked slowly to the great window, turning his back on Kyle to look down at the city. The dawn had broken fully now, casting the steel and glass spires in a cold, unforgiving light. For years, he had looked at this view and seen order, control, a monument to his own will. Now, for the first time, he saw what Kale saw. The cracks in the pavement, the shadows between the buildings, the countless lives moving through the system, each with their own fears and desires, the invisible pressures. What you propose, Elias said, his voice a low murmur, his reflection a faint ghost in the glass, is a significant risk. It introduces an element of instability into my inner circle. Marcus and the others will not accept you as an equal. They will see you as a weakness, a pet project. They will challenge you. Let them, Kyle said, his voice ringing with a strength he didn't know he possessed. I have been challenged my entire life. I am still standing. Elias turned from the window, his face unreadable. He walked back toward Kale until he was standing only a few feet away. The difference in their height, in their physical presence, was stark. The Alpha and the Omega, the dominant and the submissive. The old roles, the old labels, were still there, a ghost in the space between them. But the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a simple equation of power. This partnership would require a degree of trust, Elias said, his gaze intense. Trust is not a commodity I trade in. Then we will build it, Kyle replied without hesitation. On a foundation of mutual interest. You need my insight. I need your platform. It is a logical, symbiotic arrangement. He was using Vance's own language, the language of systems and logic, to argue for something profoundly human. It was the only way to reach him. Elias was silent for a full minute, his eyes searching Cale's, looking for any sign of deception, of weakness, of fear. He found none. He found only a quiet, unshakable resolve. A man who had been to the bottom of his own personal abyss and had climbed back out, not broken, but forged anew. He had gone into that heat as Analyst 7B, a man hiding from himself. He had emerged as Kyle. Elias gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well, Kale," he said, and the sound of his name, spoken with this new tone of consideration, of acceptance, was a quiet cataclysm. "We will try your third option, your partnership." He extended a hand. It was not a gesture of dominance, but of agreement, a contract being sealed. Kyle looked at the outstretched hand. He thought of the last time Vance had touched him, a gesture of comfort in the depths of his pain. This was different. This was a choice, his choice. He placed his hand in Vance's. The Alpha's grip was firm, warm, and steady. A current, a spark of energy passed between them. The resonance, it was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of their new, fragile alliance. "You will have an office on this floor," Elias said, withdrawing his hand, the professional mask returning, though it did not sit as perfectly as before. "You will have full access to all project data. You will report directly to me. Your first assignment will be to draft a new, comprehensive risk analysis for the Helios initiative, incorporating the systemic human factors you mentioned." He was testing him, immediately, giving him the chance to prove his own audacious claims. "I'll need my datapad," Kale said, "and a new security clearance." "It is being arranged," Elias said. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the panel. "There is one condition." Kale waited. "You will continue to live here, in the penthouse, for now. Your unique biological status still makes you a security risk. Your safety must be guaranteed." It was a reminder that, for all their talk of partnership, Vance still held the power. He was still the captor, Kale still the captive. The cage had just gotten larger, the bars more ornate. But it was a start, a crack in the system, a place to begin. "I understand," Kale said. Elias nodded once, a final gesture of acknowledgement, and then he was gone. Kyle was alone in the vast, silent room. He walked to the window and looked down at the city, the same view that had been his prison wall for days. But now it looked different. It was not just a symbol of his captivity. It was a challenge, a system to be understood, to be navigated, perhaps even to be changed. He was not free, not yet, but he was no longer hiding. He took a deep breath, the air clean and cool in his lungs. For the first time, he did not smell the scent of a cage. He smelled the faint, distant promise of a coming storm. And he was ready for the rain.